Welcome back to American DA Live. On November 30th of 2008, Marilyn Heggie was found dead in her Red River Road home. She lived there with her granddaughter, Heather McLaughlin, and her 3 young children. Heather was dating Dominique Lewis at the time, and he wanted to move into the home with them. Marilyn was not comfortable with that, and she did not like the fact that neither Dominique or Heather could keep a job, so she wanted them both to move out. On June 2nd of 2010, Dominique Lewis was charged with the murder of Marilyn Heggie, along with burglary, tampering with physical evidence, and fraudulent use of a credit card. Heather McLaughlin was also charged with the murder, burglary, fraudulent use of a credit card, and tampering with physical evidence. Dominique was sentenced to life in prison without parole, and Heather was sentenced to prison and is eligible for parole in 20 years. On today's show, host Jack Patty, Ray the DA, and Assistant Commonwealth Attorneys Cindy Reeker and Tracy Kinnear will discuss the details of this case.
Friday and handed me some pictures that I would just as soon not have seen, in all honesty, of our victim in this murder case. Tell us about this case and introduce us to the folks you brought with you this morning.
I will. It never ceases to amaze the police and those of us that are prosecutors at some of the things that people do to each other. And this is a prime example. Marilyn Heggie was 78 years old, and in November of 2008, she was found dead in her home on Red River Drive. She had been severely and viciously beaten to death, and that was the beginning of a case. Of course, the police investigated it. The case was assigned to Cindy Reeker, who is an experienced prosecutor in our office, and because it involved a crime against an elderly victim, Cindy asked Tracy Kinnear, who has worked with crimes against the elderly for a long time, to sit in the second chair. So Cindy Reeker is here with us, and Tracy Kinnear is here with us. And Cindy, tell us a little bit about the background of this. Who is Marilyn Heggie, and what was her situation before she was murdered?
Marilyn was retired. The day that she was found, the day of her death, it was her 78th birthday. She was by profession a nurse, and years ago she had gone and actually done some service work in Costa Rica. And while in Costa Rica, she had a friend who was adopting a child there from an orphanage, and she decided that she would like to do the same. So she went to the orphanage, and there were only 2 children left in the orphanage, so she ended up adopting both of those children, a boy and a girl, and brought them back and raised them. And she has family, she has sisters that live in Ohio. Her daughter had several children. Her daughter is Lily, and her son is Carlos. And Lily had several children. One of those children was Heather McLaughlin, who ended up being one of the defendants in this case. And Heather, I guess, fell on hard times, best we could tell, and didn't have a place to live. And so her grandmother took her and her 3 children in, and they were living with her on Red River Drive when this happened.
Jack, this was Cindy. This is typical of what we in our office do. You become part of the preparation is to become very, very familiar with the people that are involved. For example, in this case, Marilyn Heggie, and Cindy does an excellent job of getting all of this information when she meets with family members and that sort of thing as she prepares this case. Well, tell us what happened. I mean, all of a sudden she's found dead on November the 30th, 2008. What's the deal?
Well, apparently what happened is her family, one of her granddaughters came home, not the granddaughter that ended up being the defendant in this case, but another one of her granddaughters had tried to call Marilyn that day because they were planning a birthday party for her. And she couldn't get hold of her, so she had gone over to the house and found the side door ajar, which was kind of unusual. She was there with her son, who was, I believe, under 10. And they went into the house and went into the back bedroom and found Marilyn in her bed, beaten very severely. And so they immediately left, called 911, and the police arrived. And when the police got there, they actually went in the back bedroom where Marilyn slept, and really weren't sure at that time whether what was the mechanism of her death, because there was so much blood spatter.
What do you mean? What does mechanism mean?
Well, whether she was shot or beaten or whether she was stabbed, and their thought, based on the amount of blood spatter that was all over the walls and the ceiling and absolutely everywhere, was that it had been a gunshot that had killed her with a high velocity kind of rifle. But they didn't see that, so they stepped out, and the forensic services unit was called. And when they got in there, they had
Now,
found
forensics, let me stop as we go along. You and I know what forensic services mean, but not everybody listening does.
It's like our CSI unit.
Yeah, they collect the evidence, and they take the photographs, and they videotape the scene, and that sort of thing. And the reason for that, the photography and the videoing of the scene, is you can't recreate it. So you have to preserve it as best you can, because what we'll end up doing is showing that video to a jury. Okay.
Okay. And so when they went in and started their investigation and crime scene collection of evidence, they discovered a pole that they weren't really sure what it was. It was white. It had blood on it and appeared to have some fingerprints on it. Ultimately, that was determined to be part of her bed rail. She was in one of a type of bed like you have in a hospital that has rails to keep you from falling out. And that had been detached, a part of that, and appeared to have been the murder weapon. And so that was immediately taken, secured, and sent to the lab so that they could attempt to get fingerprinting at that point.
Were they able to get fingerprints?
They were not able to get, they had a palm print on the weapon itself that they ultimately weren't really able to make a comparison on, but they did get that. So after they cleaned out the scene and collected this evidence, they began to talk with family members who were on the scene, and they really weren't sure at that point about who a suspect might be in the case, because by all accounts, she didn't have anybody that would have had a grudge against her or any reason to have come in. It appeared that her purse was gone at the scene, and so there was some thought maybe that there had been a robbery involved in the case.
Okay.
Behind me, you'll see a mugshot of Heather McLaughlin, who was not said to have been there when her grandmother was murdered, but helped premeditate the murder. Next, you have Dominique Lewis, who was charged with the murder of Heather McLaughlin's grandmother, Marilyn Heggie. To learn more, click below or tune in every Friday morning at 9 a.m. on News Talk 590.